At 72, Eleanor Thompson believed her golden years would bloom with love and laughter, surrounded by her son Michael, now a 45-year-old lawyer thriving in Chicago's glittering skyline. She'd poured her heart into raising him alone, trading dreams for his success, her modest home a testament to a lifetime of sacrifice. But on a bitter November night, Michael's words struck like a blade. "Mom." And his eyes, once warm, now cold, fixed on the papers for Sunset Pines nursing home. Eleanor's world crumbled. Betrayed by the boy she'd rocked to sleep, her heart pounded with shock and sorrow. How could her own son cast her aside? As she packed her bags, a spark of defiance flickered. What would she do in the sterile halls of Sunset Pines? Would she fade into silence or rise to reclaim her worth? One thing was certain. Eleanor's story was far from over, and Michael was about to learn the true weight of his choice. Eleanor Thompson sat in her cozy living room, the soft glow of a table lamp casting shadows on the walls adorned with decades of memories. Framed photos chronicled her life. A young Eleanor cradling baby Michael, his tiny hands grasping her finger. A proud moment at his high school graduation, her smile wide, despite the exhaustion of working double shifts at the diner. And a recent snapshot of them laughing over Thanksgiving dinner, the table laden with her famous pecan pie. At 72, her body moved slower, her arthritis flaring on chilly days. But her spirit remained vibrant, tethered to the belief that family was her anchor. Her modest bungalow on the edge of Chicago, paid off through years of scrimping, was more than a house. It was her legacy, a symbol of the American dream she'd clawed her way toward as a single mother. She'd always imagined growing old here, with Michael's children playing in the backyard, the scent of her rose garden filling the air. That November evening, however, the air carried a different weight. Michael arrived unannounced, his tailored suit crisp, his face taut with an unfamiliar edge. Eleanor sensed something amiss. His usual warmth was gone, replaced by a detached efficiency. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, setting a folder on the coffee table. His voice, sharp and businesslike, sliced through the room's quiet. She offered him coffee, hoping to ease the tension, but he waved it off, his eyes fixed on the folder. "I've been thinking about your future," he continued, his words measured. "You're not getting any younger, and I can't keep worrying about you. It's too much. You're a burden." The word landed like a thunderclap, reverberating in Eleanor's chest. A burden? Her mind reeled, struggling to reconcile the man before her with the boy she'd bandaged knees for, the teenager she'd stayed up late helping with math homework, the son she'd cheered at every milestone. She stared at him, searching for a trace of remorse, but Michael's gaze remained steady, almost clinical. "I've found a place for you," he said, sliding the folder toward her. "Sunset Pines nursing home." "It's nice, Mom. They'll take care of you." "It's for the best." The papers inside detailed a sterile world of scheduled meals and group activities, a far cry from the life she'd built. Eleanor's hands trembled as she flipped through them, her vision blurring, not from age, but from the sting of tears she refused to let fall. "Michael," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is my home. I raised you here. How can you do this?" He shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. "I have my own life, Mom. A career, responsibilities. I can't be your caretaker." "You'll be fine there." His words were final, a door slamming shut on their shared history. The betrayal cut deeper than Eleanor could have imagined. She thought of the nights she'd worked late to afford his college applications, the dreams she'd shelved to ensure his path was clear. Had it all been for nothing? The boy who'd once clung to her during thunderstorms now saw her as an inconvenience, a line item to be outsourced. Her heart ached with a raw, visceral pain, as if the very foundation of her life had cracked. Yet, beneath the hurt, a quiet fury began to simmer. She wasn't just a mother. She was a woman who'd faced hardship before and come out stronger. Michael's dismissal lit a spark, one that refused to be snuffed out. The next morning, Eleanor stood in her bedroom, packing a small suitcase. Each item, a worn sweater, a photo of her parents, a locket Michael had given her for Mother's Day, felt like a piece of her identity being folded away. She moved slowly, not out of frailty, but because every motion carried the weight of disbelief. How had it come to this? She replayed Michael's words, each syllable a fresh wound, a burden. The phrase echoed, fueling her resolve. She wouldn't beg him to change his mind. Pride wouldn't allow it. But she also wouldn't let this be the end of her story. As she zipped the suitcase, her eyes caught the garden through the window, her roses defiant against the autumn chill. They were survivors, just like her. Michael drove her to Sunset Pines that afternoon, the car ride silent except for the hum of the engine. He didn't look at her, his hands gripping the wheel, his focus on the road ahead. Eleanor sat upright, her face composed, though inside, a storm raged. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but she held her tongue. Words wouldn't change him, not yet. As they pulled into the nursing home's parking lot, the building loomed, its beige facade and manicured lawn masking the isolation within. A staff member greeted them, her smile practiced, her voice overly cheerful. "Welcome, Mrs. Thompson. We'll take good care of you." Eleanor nodded, her expression unreadable. Michael handed over her suitcase, muttering, "I'll visit soon." She didn't respond, her silence louder than any rebuke. Stepping into Sunset Pines, Eleanor felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. The lobby smelled of antiseptic and artificial flowers, a stark contrast to the earthy warmth of her home. Other residents shuffled past, some with vacant stares, others chatting in low tones. This was her new reality, a place where she was expected to fade quietly into the background. But Eleanor Thompson was no stranger to adversity. She'd raised a son alone, navigated a world that often overlooked women like her, and built a life from nothing. As she was shown to her room, a small space with a single window, she made a silent vow. Michael might have written her off, but she wasn't done, not by a long shot. What he didn't know, what he'd soon learn, was that Eleanor's strength ran deeper than he could imagine, and the consequences of his choice were only beginning to unfold. Her first night at Sunset Pines was restless, the unfamiliar bed creaking under her weight, the silence broken by distant coughs and the hum of a heater. She lay awake, her mind a whirlwind of memories and questions. Had she failed Michael somehow? Was this her fault? But the more she thought, the clearer it became. This wasn't about her shortcomings. It was about Michael's choices, his refusal to see her as anything but an obligation. That realization steeled her. She didn't know what she'd do next, but she knew one thing. She'd find a way to remind her son that family wasn't disposable. The spark of defiance from the night before grew, a ember ready to ignite. Eleanor closed her eyes, not in defeat, but in determination, ready to face whatever came next in this unexpected chapter of her life. The sterile walls of Sunset Pines nursing home closed around Eleanor Thompson like a cage, each beige corridor a reminder of the life she'd been forced to leave behind. Her first days were a blur of disorientation, the antiseptic scent stinging her nose, the hum of fluorescent lights a constant drone. At 72, she'd expected to spend her days tending her Chicago garden, not navigating a world of scheduled meals and forced cheer. The staff, with their practiced smiles, called her dear and ushered her to activities, bingo, knitting circles, movie nights, that felt like distractions from the truth. She'd been discarded. Her room, a cramped space with a single window overlooking a parking lot, held none of the warmth of her bungalow. The rose-colored quilt she'd brought from home lay folded on the bed, a solitary anchor to her past. Each morning, Eleanor woke to the same ache, the sting of Michael's words, "You're a burden," echoing in her mind. She'd raised him alone, sacrificed her youth to give him a shot at the American dream, only to be relegated to this place, her worth reduced to a checked box on his to-do list. Life at Sunset Pines was a study in monotony. Breakfast at 7:00 a.m., oatmeal and wheat coffee served on plastic trays. Group activities at 10 o'clock, where residents shuffled cards or stared blankly at a TV blaring old sitcoms. Lunch at noon, dinner at 5 o'clock, each meal punctuated by the clatter of trays and the murmur of small talk. Eleanor tried to engage, chatting with a woman named Doris about her grandchildren or nodding politely during a sing-along, but her heart wasn't in it. She felt like an actor in someone else's play, her real self trapped behind a facade of compliance. At night, alone in her room, she'd trace the edges of a photo she kept on her nightstand. Her and Michael at his college graduation, her face beaming with pride. The memory was a double-edged sword, warming her with love, then cutting her with betrayal. How had the boy who'd hugged her so tightly that day become the man who'd cast her aside? Yet, Eleanor's spirit refused to break. She'd faced hardship before, losing her husband young, working grueling hours to keep a roof over Michael's head, and emerged stronger. This was no different, she told herself, though the pain was sharper, more personal. She began to observe her surroundings with a keener eye, noting the routines, the staff's habits, the residents' stories. Others, like Mr. Callahan, who muttered about his ungrateful daughter, carried a quiet anger that mirrored her own. These glimpses of shared struggle sparked something in Eleanor, a sense that she wasn't alone, that her story, though painful, was part of a larger tapestry. She started keeping a journal, scribbling thoughts in the margins of a worn notebook. I am not a burden. I am Eleanor Thompson, and I built a life worth fighting for. The turning point came 3 weeks into her stay during a rare moment of solitude in the communal lounge. Eleanor sat by a window, sipping lukewarm tea, when she overheard two aides whispering about a visitor. That lawyer guy, Michael something, one said. He's selling his mom's house to buy some fancy lake house. The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow, her teacup rattling in her hand. Her house? The one she'd paid off with decades of diner tips and overtime? The one where she'd raised Michael, where every creak of the floorboards held a memory, was being sold? For a vacation home? The betrayal deepened, a fresh wound layered over the old. She'd assumed Michael's decision to send her here was born of convenience, but this was greed pure and simple. Her home wasn't just a building. It was her legacy, her proof of a life well lived. The thought of it being auctioned off to fund Michael's indulgence ignited a fury she hadn't felt in years. Eleanor's anger was a wildfire, burning away the fog of despair. She paced her room that night, her arthritis forgotten, her mind racing. Michael thought he could erase her from his life, strip away her roots, and leave her to wither in this place. He was wrong. She wasn't the frail, helpless woman he'd imagined. She was a survivor, forged in the crucible of hardship. But what could she do? She had no money to fight him legally, no way to reclaim her home from the confines of Sunset Pines. Yet, the more she thought, the clearer it became. She didn't need brute force. She had something Michael had always underestimated: her mind. Eleanor had always been resourceful, solving problems with wit where others used wallets. She'd once fixed a leaking roof with duct tape and determination. Surely she could find a way to make Michael face the consequences of his actions. The next morning, Eleanor sought out the nursing home's communal phone, her hands steady despite the storm in her chest. She dialed Clara, her old friend from the diner days, now a retired attorney living in Evanston. Clara's voice, warm and gravelly, was a lifeline. "Eleanor, what's wrong?" she asked, sensing the urgency. Haltingly, Eleanor poured out the story. Michael's betrayal, the nursing home, the plan to sell her house. Clara listened, her silence heavy with empathy. "That boy's got no right," she said finally. "Let me come see you. We'll figure this out." Eleanor hung up, a flicker of hope piercing the darkness. Clara's visit 2 days later was a turning point. Over lukewarm coffee in the lounge, the two women hatched a plan. Clara, with her legal know-how, suggested digging into Michael's finances. "Men like him always leave a trail," she said, her eyes glinting. "If he's playing dirty, we'll find it." As Clara left, promising to make calls, Eleanor felt a shift within her. The sadness that had weighed her down was still there, but it was no longer a chain, it was fuel. She returned to her journal, writing with newfound purpose. Michael thinks he's won, but he doesn't know me. Not really. Each day, she grew more resolute, her observations sharper, her resolve ironclad. She began talking more with other residents, collecting their stories, finding strength in their resilience. Mr. Callahan's gruff advice, "Don't let him break you, Ellie," became a mantra. Eleanor didn't know what Clara would uncover, but she knew one thing. She was done being invisible. Sunset Pines might be her prison for now, but it wouldn't be her grave. She was Eleanor Thompson, and she was ready to fight, not with shouts or tears, but with the quiet, unrelenting power of a woman who'd been underestimated one time too many. Eleanor Thompson's days at Sunset Pines nursing home had settled into a rhythm of quiet rebellion, her journal a testament to her refusal to fade away. The sting of Michael's betrayal, calling her a burden and planning to sell her cherished Chicago home, had transformed from a wound into a spark, igniting a resolve she hadn't felt in years. At 72, she was no stranger to hardship, but this fight was different, personal, a battle for her dignity. Her conversation with Clara, her old friend and retired attorney, had planted a seed of hope. Clara's promise to dig into Michael's finances gave Eleanor something to cling to, a lifeline in the sterile confines of the nursing home. Each morning, as she sipped weak coffee and watched the other residents shuffle through their routines, Eleanor's mind churned with possibilities. She didn't want to destroy her son, but he needed to understand the weight of his action. The question was how a woman with no resources, trapped in a place designed to keep her docile, could outmaneuver a successful lawyer like Michael. Clara's next visit, a week after their first meeting, crackled with purpose. She arrived at Sunset Pines with a thick manila folder, her silver hair pulled back, her eyes sharp with the focus of a woman who'd spent decades unraveling legal puzzles. They settled in the lounge, away from the aide's curious glances, the hum of a daytime talk show masking their conversation. "Eleanor, you are right to call me," Clara said, her voice low but steady. "Michael's not as clean as he thinks." She opened the folder, revealing bank statements, emails, and tax documents, papers she'd obtained through old contacts in the legal world. Eleanor's heart raced as Clara explained. Michael had been running a side business, a consulting firm that funneled unreported income through offshore accounts. It was a risky move, one that skirted the edges of legality, and he'd been sloppy, leaving a trail of digital breadcrumbs. "He's dodging taxes," Clara said, tapping a highlighted line. "The IRS would have a field day with this." Eleanor leaned back, her mind spinning. Michael, the polished lawyer who'd built a life of privilege on her sacrifices, had a secret that could unravel it all. The revelation was both a shock and a strange relief. It confirmed what she'd begun to suspect. Her son wasn't infallible. He'd underestimated her, assuming she'd wither in Sunset Pines while he sold her home for a lake house. But Eleanor wasn't the frail, compliant woman he'd imagined. She was a survivor, forged by years of solving problems with wit and grit. The question now was what to do with this knowledge. She could confront Michael, demand he stop the sale, but he'd likely dismiss her, his arrogance a shield. No, she needed something sharper, something that would force him to face the consequences without dragging her into a public feud. "What are options?" she asked Clara, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. Clara's lips curved into a knowing smile. "We don't need to go to court, Ellie. That's his battlefield. We can be smarter." She outlined a plan, an anonymous tip to the IRS, detailed enough to spark an investigation but untraceable to Eleanor. The beauty of it was its simplicity. Michael's own actions would be his undoing. The IRS didn't need much to start sniffing around, and once they did, his carefully curated life would crack under the pressure. Eleanor hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of the folder. This wasn't just about her house anymore. It was about justice, about teaching Michael that family wasn't a commodity to be traded. Yet a part of her, the mother who'd sung him lullabies, ached at the thought of his downfall. "I don't want to ruin him," she said softly. "I just want him to see me, really see me." Clara nodded, her expression softening. "This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. He'll survive, but he'll learn." For the next few days, Eleanor wrestled with the decision. She sat in her room, the rose-colored quilt draped over her lap, staring at the photo of her and Michael at his graduation. The boy in that picture had been her world, but the man he'd become had cast her aside. She thought of her home, the garden where she'd planted roses with her mother's clippings, the kitchen where she'd taught Michael to make pancakes. Losing it wasn't just a financial blow, it was an erasure of her legacy. That thought tipped the scales. She met Clara again, this time in a quiet corner of the nursing home's garden, the autumn air crisp against her skin. "Do it," she said, her voice firm. "Send the tip." Clara squeezed her hand, a silent promise, and left to make the call. The act itself was anticlimactic. A few emails sent through an encrypted service Clara's contact had set up, the documents attached like silent missiles. Eleanor felt a surge of adrenaline as Clara confirmed the tip had been received. Her heart pounded, a mix of fear and exhilaration. What would happen next? Would Michael suspect her? She pushed the doubts aside, focusing on the bigger picture. This wasn't about sinking to his level. It was about reclaiming her power, proving she was more than a burden. She imagined Michael opening a letter from the IRS, his smug confidence faltering, and felt a flicker of satisfaction. Let him sweat, she thought. Let him feel the weight of his choices. In the days that followed, Eleanor kept her routine, masking her anticipation behind polite smiles. She played bingo, chatted with Doris about her grandkids, and wrote in her journal, "I've done what I had to, not for spite, but for truth." She didn't know how long it would take for the IRS to act, but Clara assured her it wouldn't be long. "They move fast when there's money involved," she'd said with a wry grin. Eleanor began to notice small changes in herself, a straighter posture, a sharper wit. The other residents sensed it too. Mr. Callahan, the gruff widower, who'd become her unlikely ally, nudged her one day at lunch. "You've got a fire in you, Ellie. Don't let this place snuff it out." His words bolstered her, a reminder that she wasn't alone in her fight. As she waited for the ripple effects of her plan, Eleanor's thoughts turned to Michael. She didn't hate him, despite everything. She saw him as a man caught in his own ambition, blind to the cost of his choices. Her tip to the IRS wasn't meant to destroy him, but to wake him up, to force him to confront the values she'd tried to instill. Honesty, family, responsibility. Whether he'd learned the lesson was up to him. For now, Eleanor felt a quiet strength growing within her, a certainty that she'd done the right thing. Sunset Pines might confine her body, but her mind was free and her spirit was unbroken. She was ready for whatever came next. A woman who'd turned betrayal into a catalyst. Her plan A, testament to the power of a mother's love and her unrelenting will. Eleanor Thompson's bold move, sending an anonymous tip to the IRS about her son Michael's tax evasion, had set an invisible machine in motion, its gears grinding beyond the beige walls of Sunset Pines nursing home. At 72, she transformed her pain into purpose, her quiet rebellion fueled by the betrayal of being called a burden and the threat of losing her Chicago home. The act of tipping off the IRS, orchestrated with Clara's help, was not about vengeance, but accountability, a way to force Michael to face the consequences of his greed. As days turned to weeks, Eleanor carried her secret like a hidden flame, her journal entries sharp with resolve. "I've done what's right. Now it's his turn to choose." She moved through the nursing home's routines. Bingo with Doris, banter with Mr. Callahan, with a newfound steadiness, her anticipation tempered by the weight of what she'd set in motion. The sterile corridors felt less like a prison, her small room a vantage point from which she awaited the fallout of her calculated strike. The first signs of trouble came subtly, like ripples before a storm. Clara, ever the vigilant ally, called the nursing home's communal phone with updates gleaned from her legal contacts. "The IRS is moving," she reported, her voice crackling with satisfaction. "They've opened an audit on Michael's firm. He's scrambling." Eleanor's heart thudded, a mix of vindication and unease. She pictured Michael in his sleek office, his tailored suits no shield against the scrutiny of federal agents. His side business, the tax-dodging scheme Claire had uncovered, was unraveling, each loose thread pulling at the fabric of his carefully curated life. Eleanor didn't revel in his distress, but she felt a quiet satisfaction. He'd dismissed her as a burden, planned to sell her home for a lake house, and now the consequences were closing in. She wrote in her journal that night, "He thought I was invisible. He was wrong." Weeks later, the ripples became a wave. Claire's next update was more pointed. Michael's firm had lost a major client, spooked by the audit's publicity. Whispers of his financial missteps had leaked to Chicago's legal circles, tarnishing his reputation as a golden boy lawyer. Eleanor listened, her hands clasped tightly, her mind torn between the mother who'd raised him and the woman he'd betrayed. She didn't want his ruin, only his awakening. Yet, the scale of the fallout surprised even her. Clara's contact reported that Michael's lake house deal had collapsed, the funds frozen as the IRS dug deeper. The irony wasn't lost on Eleanor. Her home, the one he'd planned to sell, remained untouched, a silent testament to her stand. She allowed herself a small smile, imagining her rose garden still blooming, defiant against the autumn chill. The true climax came on a gray December afternoon, 3 months after Eleanor's arrival at Sunset Pines. She was in the lounge, half listening to a Christmas carol sing-along, when an aide approached. "Mrs. Thompson, you have a visitor." Eleanor's breath caught. She knew instinctively who it was. She followed the aide to the reception area, her steps measured, her heart a drumbeat. There stood Michael, his usual polish replaced by a rumpled suit and shadowed eyes. At 45, he looked older, the weight of his troubles etched into his face. "Mom," he said, his voice softer than she'd heard in years, almost childlike. "Can we talk?" The room seemed to shrink, the hum of the nursing home fading as Eleanor faced the son who'd cast her aside. They sat in a quiet corner, Michael's hands fidgeting, his gaze darting to the floor. "I'm sorry," he began, the words tumbling out. I didn't mean for things to get this bad. The audit, the firm, it's a mess. I was wrong, Mom, about you, about the house. I need your help." His plea hung between them, raw and unguarded. Eleanor studied him, seeing not just the man who'd hurt her, but the boy she'd loved through every storm. Her heart ached, but her resolve held firm. She'd spent months in Sunset Pines, her dignity battered, her home threatened. His apology, though sincere, couldn't erase that. "Michael," she said, her voice calm but unyielding, "you called me a burden. You tried to sell my home, my life, for your own gain. Why should I help you now?" Michael flinched, his face paling. "I was selfish," he admitted. "I thought I was doing the right thing, putting you somewhere safe. I didn't see how much I was hurting you." His voice cracked, and for a moment Eleanor saw the vulnerability she'd known in his childhood. But she wasn't swayed by sentiment alone. "We all carry burdens," she said, echoing a truth she'd learned in the nursing home's lonely nights. "The trick is learning to share them, not pass them off." She leaned forward, her eyes locking with his. "You want my help? Show me you've learned. Make this right, not just for me, but for yourself." Her words were a challenge, not a rejection. Eleanor didn't offer to fix his mess. She had neither the means nor the desire to shield him from the IRS. Instead, she gave him something harder, a chance to rebuild, to prove he could be the man she'd raised. Michael nodded, his expression a mix of shame and determination. "I'll try," he said, standing to leave. "I'll come back, Mom, I promise." As he walked away, Eleanor felt a weight lift. Not from forgiveness, but from Claire. She'd held her ground, her voice heard at last. Back in her room, Eleanor sat by the window, the parking lot outside dusted with early snow. She didn't know if Michael would keep his word, But that was his journey now. Her tip to the IRS had done its work. Not just disrupting his life, but forcing him to see her, really see her, as more than an obligation. She opened her journal, writing, "I've given him a mirror. What he sees is up to him." The nursing home's walls no longer felt like a cage. They were a stage where she'd reclaimed her strength. Doris noticed the change at dinner, nudging her with a grin. "You look like you've won something, Ellie." Eleanor only smiled, her heart steady. She hadn't won a war, but she'd won herself back, and that was enough for now. The confrontation with Michael in the quiet corner of Sunset Pines nursing home had left Eleanor Thompson with a quiet clarity, her heart no longer tethered to the pain of his betrayal. At 72, she'd faced her son's apology, his plea for help amidst the chaos of an IRS audit she'd triggered, and responded not with vengeance, but with a challenge to be better. The weight of being called a burden and nearly losing her Chicago home had forced her anew, her time in the nursing home a crucible for resilience. As winter deepened, Eleanor felt a shift within her, a lightness that came not from Michael's promises, but from her own reclaimed strength. She'd held her ground, her voice no longer silenced, and that was a victory deeper than any apology. Spring arrived, and with it, a letter from Clara. The IRS audit had forced Michael to settle his debts, but he'd kept his law license, a chance to rebuild. More importantly, Clara's contacts confirmed he'd halted the sale of Eleanor's home. The news was a quiet triumph, her rose garden safe, its blooms a symbol of her endurance. Eleanor decided it was time to leave Sunset Pines. With Clara's help, she arranged to return to her bungalow, the paperwork as much a declaration of independence as a legal process. The day she walked out, Doris and Mr. Callahan waved from the lounge, their cheers a reminder of the bonds she'd forged in adversity. "Don't be a stranger, Ellie," Doris called, and Eleanor promised to visit, her heart full. Stepping into her home, Eleanor inhaled the familiar scent of wood and earth, the rooms alive with memories of raising Michael. She tended her garden first, her hands in the soil, coaxing new life from the roses. The act was meditative, each petal a testament to her survival. Michael visited a week later, his demeanor humbler, his eyes carrying a tentative hope. "I'm trying, Mom," he said, offering to help with repairs around the house. Their conversation was cautious, not fully healed, but it was a start. Eleanor didn't demand more. She'd given him a mirror, and his reflection was his to shape. She saw glimpses of the boy she'd raised, a flicker of the values she'd instilled: honesty, family, accountability. Eleanor's day settled into a rhythm of freedom. She joined a local seniors club, her stories of resilience inspiring others. She hosted Clara for coffee, their laughter echoing in the kitchen, where she'd once taught Michael to cook. Her journal, once a lifeline in Sunset Pines, now chronicled hope. "I am not a burden. I am Eleanor, and my story is mine to write." The nursing home had been a detour, not a destination, a place where she'd rediscovered her worth. She wrote letters to Doris and Mr. Callahan, sharing updates, her words a bridge between past and present. For the Kanji and Chow in America, Eleanor's journey was a beacon. Her refusal to be defined by betrayal, her clever stand against Michael's greed, and her choice to offer a path to redemption rather than destruction resonated deeply. She embodied the values they cherished: self-reliance, family, and the quiet power of forgiveness that doesn't erase accountability. Eleanor's home, her garden, her life were hers again, not because Michael had changed, but because she had claimed them. As she watched her roses bloom under a Chicago sky, she felt a peace hard-won, a certainty that her golden years would be defined not by loss, but by the strength she'd always carried within.